Logan, once feared as the Wolverine, comes to in the back of a limousine, his head heavy and senses dulled. It's deep into the night. He drags himself out of the vehicle and immediately notices a group of Mexican thieves attempting to strip the limo of its wheels. With little energy but a trace of his old instinct, Logan steps in to stop them. Before he can do much, one of the men fires a shotgun straight at him. The blast knocks him down, but not out. Slowly rising, he extends his claws, but even that simple act now causes him visible pain. Worse still, one of the claws doesn't fully emerge. Despite his weakened state, Logan charges into the fight. The gang overwhelms him at first, landing heavy blows and dragging him down, but he pushes through the punishment. One by one, he brutally incapacitates them, killing several in the process, until the survivors panic and flee into the darkness. The setting is the year 2029. Logan, though appearing no older than a man in his 50s, is in reality over 170 years old. Time has finally caught up with him. His once legendary healing ability is deteriorating, and the adamantium fused to his skeleton is slowly poisoning him from within. His body aches constantly, and he occasionally coughs up blood, a clear sign that he's fading. Mutants themselves are nearly gone. No new ones have been born in over 2 decades. Now living under his birth name, James Howlett, Logan works as a chauffeur in El Paso, Texas, trying to stay under the radar. Tucked away among his belongings is a single adamantium bullet, a grim backup plan should he ever decide he's had enough. While waiting outside a funeral for his next fare, Logan is approached by a desperate woman named Gabriela Lopez. She seems to recognize him and pleads for his assistance, but Logan, unwilling to get involved in anything complicated, dismisses her outright. As she drives away, a young girl seated in the back silently watches him. The next day, Logan picks up a passenger who introduces himself as Donald Pierce. It quickly becomes clear that Pierce knows far more than he should. He references Logan's recent altercation with the gang and even hints at Logan's secret responsibility, caring for an aging Charles Xavier hidden across the border. Pierce explains he's searching for something Gabriella took from his organization and implies that Logan has already been drawn into the situation. Before leaving, he hands Logan a card, instructing him to call if Gabriella resurfaces. The card identifies Pierce as the head of security for a company called Alkali Transigen, a biotech corporation. Frustrated and uneasy, Logan drives off and heads into Mexico. There, in a remote, abandoned industrial site, he lives with Caliban, a pale, light-sensitive mutant with tracking abilities, and cares for Charles Xavier. Once the most powerful telepath in the world, Xavier is now a fragile shadow of himself. He suffers from a severe neurodegenerative condition that triggers dangerous seizures. Because of his immense psychic power, these episodes unleash devastating mental waves that can incapacitate anyone nearby. To manage this, Logan administers a specialized medication designed to suppress Xavier's seizures. However, the drug comes with side effects, often leaving Charles disoriented and mentally unstable. The loss of his school and the X-Men has broken him deeply, and he bitterly suggests that Logan is simply waiting for him to die. Logan denies it, but the tension between them is clear. Meanwhile, Caliban expresses concern over their situation, particularly the strain of caring for Xavier. He points out that Logan himself is in bad shape, but refuses to acknowledge it or seek help. Logan, unwilling to hear it, brushes him off and walks away. Later, Logan receives a job request for 2 passengers at a nearby motel. When he arrives, he finds Gabriella again, this time with the young girl from before. Gabriella introduces her as Laura, her 11-year-old daughter. She urgently offers Logan $50,000 to drive them to a place called Eden, located in North Dakota, near the Canadian border. She hands him an envelope containing $20,000 upfront along with coordinates. Reluctant but tempted by the money, Logan agrees. Returning to the hideout, he tells Xavier that their long-discussed plan to escape and buy a boat might finally happen. But when Logan goes back to the motel, everything has changed. Gabriella is dead, brutally murdered, and Laura has vanished. Logan grabs Gabriella's phone and sees she was in the middle of sending him a message, warning him to hurry because they had been discovered. Defeated, Logan heads back, only to be shocked upon discovering Laura hiding inside the trunk of his limo. Xavier, delighted by her presence, immediately senses something special about the girl and insists they must protect her. Logan, however, knows better. Trouble will follow her and quickly. Sure enough, Donald Pierce and his men arrive not long after. Logan denies knowing anything about Laura, trying to send them away, but Pierce presses harder. Suddenly, Laura intervenes, launching a metal pipe directly at Pierce's head, knocking him unconscious. Realizing they're out of time, Logan orders Caliban to take Pierce far into the desert and abandon him there. Caliban, shielding himself from sunlight with heavy coverings, drags Pierce's body away. But before he can return, a unit of heavily armed operatives, the Reavers, working for Transigen, descend on him. They recover Pierce and capture Caliban. The Reavers then storm the hideout. Two of them enter the building to retrieve Laura, expecting an easy capture. Inside, they find her calmly eating cereal, as if nothing is wrong. Outside, Logan and Xavier wait anxiously until chaos erupts within. Gunshots echo, followed by screams. Moments later, Laura emerges. Without hesitation, she tosses the severed head of one of the Reavers at Pierce's feet. Then she steps forward, revealing something shocking: two sharp claws extending from each of her hands, and an additional claw protruding from each foot. Without a word, she lunges into battle, tearing through the Reavers with savage precision. Logan, still processing what he's just witnessed, finally steps in to back Laura up. Together, they fight their way out of the chaos. With no time to waste, Logan gets everyone into the limo, Charles and Laura in the back, and speeds away from the scene. Meanwhile, Caliban isn't so lucky. The Reavers capture him and expose him to brutal sunlight, exploiting his extreme sensitivity to force him into using his tracking abilities to locate Logan and the others. As they drive, Logan demands answers. Who is this girl? What exactly is going on? Xavier, calm but firm, tells him that Laura is more like him than he realizes. That only deepens Logan's frustration. Searching for clarity, he goes through Gabriella's phone and finds a video she had recorded. It reveals that she once worked for Transigen in their genetics division. But before the footage can explain everything, the phone battery dies. They make a stop at a small roadside store to gather supplies. Inside, Laura casually pockets some snacks and sunglasses, drawing the attention of the store clerk. When he tries to stop her, she reacts instantly, flipping him onto the ground with surprising force and nearly unsheathing her claws. Logan intervenes just in time, firmly telling her, not okay. He grabs a charger and a cigar before ushering her out. That night, with the phone finally powered up, Logan watches the rest of Gabriella's message. What he learns changes everything. Gabriella explains that she had been working as a nurse for Transigen, where they were secretly engineering mutant children. Under the direction of Dr. Xander Rice, they used genetic material taken from known mutants, many of whom were already dead, to create a new generation. These children were carried by surrogate mothers who were deliberately chosen to remain anonymous. Laura was one of them, designated X-23. The children were raised in cold, controlled environments, stripped of anything resembling a normal childhood. Even small joys like celebrating birthdays were forbidden, but despite Transigen's efforts, the children developed emotions, empathy, traits that made them unpredictable. Ultimately, the program was deemed unsuccessful. A new model, X-24, was introduced, and the decision was made to eliminate the earlier batch. Unwilling to let that happen, Gabriella helped several of the children escape. She reveals that Eden was meant to be a safe haven, a place where they could cross into Canada and finally live free. In her final words, Gabriella confesses that she isn't Laura's biological mother, but she loves her like one. Then, addressing Logan directly, she admits she lied about the money she promised him. But she hopes that, knowing Laura is his daughter, created from his DNA, he will protect her. The weight of that truth lingers as they continue their journey. They eventually reach Oklahoma City and check into a hotel. While there, Logan notices Laura reading an old X-Men comic book. Flipping through it, he's shocked to find that the coordinates to Eden are printed inside. To him, it's proof that the whole thing is nothing more than a fantasy, a story taken too seriously. Frustrated, he confronts Laura, dismissing everything she believes in. Xavier strongly disapproves of his harshness, but Logan insists the X-Men stories are exaggerated myths, not reality, and that Eden doesn't exist. Unable to deal with it, he leaves them in the room and heads downstairs. That's when he spots them. The Reavers have tracked them down. Before he can react, everything around him freezes. People stop mid-motion, unable to move. Logan immediately understands. Charles is having another seizure. Fighting through the invisible force pressing against him, Logan struggles step by step back to the room. Inside, several Reavers have already reached Laura and Xavier. Summoning every ounce of strength, Logan fights through the paralysis, taking them out one by one. He quickly administers the serum to Charles, bringing the episode to an end. As the world regains motion, they waste no time escaping, abandoning the limo and taking a different vehicle. Out on the road, a news report begins discussing the incident in Oklahoma City, drawing eerie comparisons to a similar event in Westchester the previous year. Logan shuts it off before hearing more. Not long after, they narrowly avoid a collision with a driverless freight truck, forced to swerve dangerously. In doing so, they nearly crash into a pickup towing a trailer full of horses. The situation escalates quickly, but Xavier intervenes, using his powers to calm and guide the animals back under control. The truck's driver introduces himself as Will Munson, traveling with his wife Catherine and their young son, Nate. Logan lends a hand, helping them pull their vehicle out of a ditch. Grateful, Catherine invites Logan and his companions to join them for dinner. Xavier eagerly accepts, clearly enjoying the rare moment of normalcy. Logan, however, remains guarded, planning to leave as soon as possible. But when Catherine insists they stay the night, Logan reluctantly agrees, for Xavier's sake. Later, Logan carries Charles upstairs and settles him into bed. Elsewhere on the property, Will notices something wrong with their water system. It appears to have been tampered with. He heads out to investigate, and Logan joins him. Together, they locate a damaged pipe and fix it. But on their way back, they're confronted by a group of aggressive men, led by someone claiming ownership of the land. The man accuses Will of falling behind on payments and tries to intimidate him. Logan steps in without hesitation. He grabs one of the men's rifles, smashes it across his face, and snaps the weapon in half. The display is enough, the group backs off. Back inside the house, Charles lies awake. As Logan enters, Xavier senses him immediately. His voice trembles as he speaks, asking Logan to show patience with Laura, who sleeps nearby on the floor. Overcome with guilt, he begins apologizing for something that happened the previous year. It becomes clear that Charles' devastating seizure at his school in Westchester led to the deaths of many X-Men. He expresses deep remorse, but before he can say more, Logan suddenly drives his claws through his chest. Laura wakes instantly and attacks in fury, trying to defend Xavier. But something is wrong. The attacker isn't Logan. Standing before them is X-24, a younger, feral clone of Logan, created without conscience or restraint. The creature captures Laura and brutally murders Catherine and Nate. Outside, Will is struck down when he returns. Logan rushes in moments later, only to find the aftermath. He runs upstairs and finds Xavier barely clinging to life. Cradling him gently, Logan whispers, "It wasn't me," trying to give him peace in his final moments as he carries him downstairs. Outside the house, the situation escalates even further. The Reavers have regrouped, now accompanied by Donald Pierce and Dr. Xander Rice. Nearby, Caliban remains trapped inside a surveillance vehicle, held captive. Just then, the same group of men who had earlier threatened will return, looking for revenge after being humiliated. But before they can do anything, X-24 intercepts them, cutting them down mercilessly without hesitation. Inside the chaos, Logan gently lays Xavier's body in the back of a pickup truck. With his final breath, Charles softly speaks the name of the boat they once dreamed of owning, and then he's gone. The loss hits Logan hard, but there's no time to grieve. Fueled by rage, he charges at X-24, engaging in a brutal and desperate fight. At the same time, Caliban refuses to remain a victim. Summoning what little strength he has left, he grabs 2 grenades and whispers a warning his mother once taught him. "Beware the light." Seconds later, he detonates them. The explosion destroys the van, hurling Pierce clear, while Dr. Rice manages to escape the blast. Back at the farm, Logan is being pushed to his limits by X-24. Just when it seems he's about to be overwhelmed, Will suddenly drives his truck straight into the clone, slamming it into nearby farming equipment. Pinned in place, X-24 is momentarily subdued. Will fires a shotgun again and again into the creature, trying to finish it off. Then, turning toward Logan, he raises the weapon, but it clicks empty. Moments later, Will collapses, succumbing to his injuries. With no time to waste, Logan gathers Laura and places Xavier's body in the vehicle. He drives off into the night, leaving the devastation behind. By morning, Dr. Rice and his team return to clean up the scene. They recover X-24 and inject it with a special compound to accelerate its healing, preparing it for pursuit once again. Elsewhere, Logan quietly buries Charles in a secluded patch of forest. Laura stands nearby, watching in silence. Afterward, overwhelmed with grief and anger, Logan returns to the truck and begins smashing it apart in a fit of frustration, until exhaustion overtakes him and he collapses. When he regains consciousness, he finds himself in a small clinic. The doctor treating him recognizes what he is and explains that the metal inside his body is poisoning him. He offers to help, but Logan refuses any further involvement. Taking Laura with him, he prepares to leave. As they go, he awkwardly thanks her, and for the first time she speaks, softly replying in Spanish, "You're welcome." Caught off guard, Logan questions why she's been silent this whole time. Laura responds by rapidly listing names, other children like her from Transigen. She insists they must find them at Eden. Her determination is relentless, and eventually Logan gives in, not because he believes her, but because he wants to prove that Eden is nothing more than a myth. The journey takes a heavy toll on him. By the time they arrive near their destination, Logan is barely conscious. Laura is forced to take over driving for the final stretch. When they reach a steep cliffside, a mechanical lift is lowered down to them, allowing them to ascend. At the top, they discover a hidden refuge, other children, just like Laura, led by a boy named Richter. For the first time in a long while, they're able to rest. The children, playful despite everything they've endured, pull a harmless prank on Logan while he sleeps, shaving off his beard to make him resemble his younger self. He wakes up annoyed, but it's a brief moment of lightness. Richter later gives Logan a vial of serum, something they had been given at Transigen, to enhance their abilities and recovery. He warns Logan to use it carefully, not all at once. That night, Logan tells Laura their journey is over. He's done what he promised, got her to safety. Emotionally distant, he explains that everyone he grows close to ends up dying, and it's better if he leaves. Laura, hurt but defiant, responds coldly that she'll be fine without him. By morning, the camp is empty. The children have already moved on. Logan prepares to leave as well, but then he spots something troubling. The Reavers have tracked them once again. Without hesitation, Logan runs toward the danger. The children are already under attack, fighting back with their powers but clearly outmatched. One by one, they're being captured. Realizing there's no other choice, Logan injects the entire vial of serum into his body. The effect is immediate. His strength surges, his wounds begin to heal, and he charges into battle with renewed fury. He tears through the Reavers, taking down most of them before confronting Dr. Rice, who now has the children lined up at gunpoint. Rice reveals a bitter truth. He is the son of the man Logan killed during his escape from the Weapon X program. He claims responsibility for wiping out mutants, explaining that Transigen engineered a virus and quietly introduced it into global food supplies, preventing new mutants from being born. Before he can continue, Logan shoots him dead, but the fight isn't over. X-24 is unleashed once again. Logan faces his clone in a final, brutal confrontation. Meanwhile, Pierce tries to maintain control of the situation, but the children turn on him, combining their powers, electric shocks, freezing blasts, and even manipulating plant life to overwhelm and kill him. As the serum's effects begin to fade, Logan weakens. X-24 gains the upper hand and, in a devastating moment, impales Logan onto a jagged tree trunk, leaving him pinned and helpless. Laura, refusing to lose him, grabs the adamantium bullet Logan had kept for himself all this time. With precise aim, she fires, destroying X-24 instantly. She rushes to Logan, cutting him free, but it's too late. His body isn't healing anymore. Through tears, Logan tells her to go to run with the others. They're finally free. Laura breaks down, calling him Daddy. Hearing it, Logan softly reflects, almost in wonder. So this is what it feels like, before his life slips away. The children lay him to rest beneath the open sky, marking his grave with a simple wooden cross. As they prepare to move on, Laura pauses. She gently turns the cross on its side, reshaping it into an X. Then, with the others, she walks forward into an uncertain future, but one where they are finally free. There are endings, and then there are farewells that feel like the closing of something far bigger than a single story. Logan is that kind of farewell. For nearly 2 decades, one man carried a character that refused to fade, claws out. Cigar in hand, pain hidden beneath intensity. Hugh Jackman didn't just portray Wolverine, he embodied him. And that's exactly why Logan feels so different, because this isn't simply the final chapter of a trilogy. It's the closing of a legacy that helped shape modern superhero cinema. And what makes that legacy so meaningful isn't just how long it lasted, it's how it evolved. We watched this character transform over years, across shifting tones, across major changes in how superhero stories were told. From stylized comic book spectacle to something far more grounded and reflective, Wolverine remained constant, yet never still. He grew alongside the audience. He carried the weight of every previous story, every scar, every loss into this final chapter. Before shared universes expanded, before formulas became familiar, before every hero was expected to lighten the moment, there was Wolverine. Raw, intense, unfiltered in his humanity, a character who never fit neatly into traditional heroism. He wasn't designed to inspire in the usual way. He was complicated, reactive, guided more by instinct than ideology. And that's what made him so compelling. You didn't watch him because he represented perfection. You watched him because he reflected imperfection. And now, he's tired, not just physically, but on a deeper level. The kind of exhaustion that doesn't come from a single conflict, but from a lifetime of them. The kind that shows in how he moves, how he speaks, how he keeps his distance, because he already understands how things tend to end. This film doesn't elevate the hero, it strips him down. No grand entrances, no applause, no recognition, just a fractured man watching the world continue without him, and there's something deeply intentional about that absence. The world no longer needs him, or at least it believes it doesn't, and that disconnect creates a quiet tragedy. Because for someone who spent so long defined by struggle, by purpose through conflict, what remains when that purpose fades? What happens when survival becomes routine instead of necessity? That emptiness lingers in every moment. That's what makes Logan so powerful as a farewell. It doesn't suggest that legends last forever. It explores what happens when they don't. When the body begins to weaken, when the past refuses to stay behind, when the journey is no longer about saving the world, but about finding a reason to keep moving forward. And that shift changes everything. The stakes become internal rather than external. It's no longer about overcoming an opponent. It's about confronting existence itself, about asking whether there's still something worth holding on to when everything familiar has already slipped away. There's something almost unsettling about watching this version of Wolverine, because for the first time, you realize he's not unbreakable, not physically, not emotionally, and maybe he never truly was. The film invites you to reconsider everything you thought you understood about him. That sense of invincibility was always a surface layer, a way to endure, not a reflection of strength. Beneath it, there was always pain, always vulnerability, always someone who endured more than he resolved. This is a film that understands something many franchise endings overlook. A true ending isn't about becoming bigger, it's about becoming honest. And that honesty is present in every creative choice. The pacing is deliberate. The action isn't stylized for spectacle. It feels grounded, heavy, and meaningful. Every moment carries consequence. Every scene lingers just a little longer than expected. No scale of spectacle can replace that. No final confrontation can overshadow it. Because what matters here isn't how Wolverine faces one last challenge, but why he chooses to. And that why becomes the emotional center of the entire experience. That's where Logan rises beyond the genre. It becomes something reflective, about time, about legacy, about what remains when the myth fades and only the person is left behind. It asks questions that go beyond the character, about aging, about relevance, about whether the things that once defined us still matter when the world changes around us. You can feel it in every frame, in the stillness, in the silence between conversations, in the way the camera lingers, allowing each moment to settle instead of rushing ahead. This isn't setting up another chapter. It isn't hinting at what comes next. It's closing a door, slowly, carefully, respectfully, and that restraint is what gives the ending its strength. It doesn't soften the farewell or dress it in spectacle. It allows it to remain what it is: final. And when it finally ends, it doesn't feel like the credits are rolling on a film. It feels like saying goodbye to someone who's been part of your journey for years, not with applause, not with celebration, but with something far more powerful: silence. The kind of silence that comes when something meaningful has reached its end and there's nothing left to say. Because Logan doesn't just conclude Wolverine's story, it closes an era. The year is 2029, and something feels off. Not in an obvious, overwhelming way. No collapsing cities, no large-scale chaos, no dramatic signs of collapse. Instead, it's subtle, almost too subtle. And that quiet becomes one of the film's defining elements. It creates a sense of unease not through spectacle, but through absence. The absence of noise, the absence of presence, the absence of something that once defined this world. Mutants are gone. Not erased in a single dramatic event, not lost in a final global conflict. They simply disappeared, faded away so gradually that the world barely noticed. And that's what makes the world of Logan so unsettling. It doesn't announce its dystopia, it suggests it, and in doing so it feels more grounded, more believable. The X-Men, gone; the legends, forgot, and the next generation, it never arrived. There's no continuation, no passing forward. Just a void where something once existed. For 25 years, no new mutants have been born. Think about that. An entire group simply stopped growing. And the weight of that idea doesn't hit all at once. It settles slowly as the implications begin to unfold. This isn't disappearance through chaos. It's disappearance by design. And the reason, not chance, not coincidence, control. A world that didn't just fear difference, but quietly engineered it out. And that subtlety makes it even more unsettling, because it suggests intention, a deliberate effort to remove unpredictability, to eliminate variation, to ensure that the future remains controlled and predictable. This version of the future isn't built on destruction, it's built on replacement, organizations shaping biology, science redefining identity, humanity deciding what should and shouldn't continue. And all of it happening beneath the surface, without spectacle or visible resistance. That's where the real unease lies, because nothing appears broken. The roads still stretch forward, the cities still operate, people still go about their routines. But something essential is missing. The world feels hollow, not visually but emotionally. as if something vital disappeared and no one fully realized its importance, and that absence creates a quiet dissonance. Everything looks familiar. But it doesn't feel right. There's a sense that progress came at a cost, because mutants were never just about abilities. They represented difference, possibility, the idea that the future could evolve into something new, something unexpected, something beyond control. And in Logan, that possibility has been closed, not through spectacle, but through precision. What remains is a world that chose stability over uncertainty, control over uncertainty, sameness over change. And that choice echoes through every part of the setting, shaping not only the world around the characters, but the emotional tone of the entire story. And that's why the setting matters so much, because this isn't just a backdrop, it's a warning. A vision of what happens when progress becomes too controlled, too curated, too afraid of difference. A world where progress exists, but evolution is managed, where people continue living, but nothing truly changes. And in that world, someone like Logan doesn't just feel older, he feels out of place. Like a remnant of something the world has already decided it no longer needs, like a piece of history that no longer fits into the present. Because in 2029, mutants didn't simply fade from the center of the world, they were removed from its future, and the world kept moving anyway. That indifference is what makes it so haunting. There was a time when Logan seemed impossible to stop. Harm didn't hold him back, pain didn't last, time didn't seem able to reach him. But in Logan, that illusion is gone, completely dismantled. This is not the Wolverine you remember. This is what remains after the legend, and the film makes sure you feel that difference immediately, in the way he struggles, in the way he pauses, in the way every movement feels heavier than it should. His body is weakening. The same healing factor that once made him seem untouchable is slowing down. Injuries remain longer, marks linger. Every intense encounter takes something from him, and for the first time you can see it. Not only in the physical toll, but in the way he responds to it. There's no longer a sense that he will simply endure no matter what. Every injury carries uncertainty. Every confrontation feels risky in a way it never did before. Even the adamantium, the thing that once made him almost impossible to match, is now harming him from within. And that reversal is one of the film's most powerful ideas. The very thing that defined his strength has become the source of his decline. The gift has become the burden. And there's something deeply tragic about that transformation, because it reframes everything that came before. What once felt like power now feels like weight. What once made him unique now isolates him even further. It's not just that he's aging, it's that he's being undone by the very identity he carried for so long. And that creates a sense of inevitability that hangs over every scene. Not urgency in the traditional sense, but a quiet awareness that time is running out, and there's nothing he can do to stop it. And then there's the way he moves. He doesn't stride anymore, he pulls himself forward. Every step feels heavy, every movement feels earned. It's not just physical decline, it's the visual language of fatigue. The camera lingers on small, almost ordinary actions. Standing up, reaching, turning. Things that used to look effortless now feel demanding. The film doesn't rush past that. It lets you sit in it, feel the weight of a body that no longer responds the way it once did. This isn't a man charging toward another heroic moment. This is a man trying to get through the day, and that distinction changes how you see him. Even before a confrontation begins, you already understand the cost, so he drinks. Not for celebration, not for pleasure, but to forget. And even that isn't framed as rebellion or indulgence, it's routine, mechanical, a way to quiet something that refuses to stay silent, because the physical pain. That isn't the deepest part, it's the guilt. Logan carries everything, every conflict, every loss, every person he couldn't protect. And the film treats those memories not as simple flashbacks or exposition, but as a constant presence. They exist in how he reacts, how quickly he shuts people out, how little patience he has left for anything that resembles hope. It's all still there, not buried, not resolved, just waiting. And now there is no mission to distract him, no team, no larger cause, no clear purpose, just silence. And in that silence, those memories become louder. That's what makes this version of Logan so different. He isn't angry because he wants another fight. He's angry because he's exhausted by everything he has carried. There's a difference between aggression and resentment, and here you feel the latter in everything. It's in the way he speaks, short, sharp, dismissive. It's in the way he avoids eye contact, as if connection itself is something he no longer trusts. There's bitterness in him, a sharp edge to every line, every gesture, every choice. Not because he hates the world, but because he has stopped believing he belongs in it, and that sense of displacement is constant. He isn't just out of time physically, he's out of place emotionally, and yet he keeps going. Not out of hope, not out of classic heroism, but because stopping would mean facing everything he has spent years trying to avoid. there's a kind of inertia to his survival. He continues not because he wants to, but because he doesn't know how not to. And that's where the film's understanding of strength becomes more nuanced than most. This is what Logan understands better than many superhero films. Strength isn't just about how much you can endure, it's about how long you can carry what is already inside you. It's endurance, not triumph, persistence, not victory. And Logan, he has been carrying it for a very long time. So when you watch him here, older, weaker, worn down, you're not just seeing a hero decline. You're seeing the cost of being that hero in the first place. The film reframes his entire past without needing to revisit it directly. Every scar becomes evidence. Every hesitation becomes history. It forces you to consider that what once looked like resilience may have always been accumulation, pain, stacking on top of pain, until it becomes something he can no longer outrun. There was a time when Charles Xavier was the most powerful mind on the planet, a man who could reach across distance, touch thoughts, guide lives, and hold instability together through sheer will. That power was always presented as precise, controlled, almost serene. In Logan, that power hasn't disappeared. It has become something far more frightening, because now he can't fully control it. And the film treats that loss of control with quiet dread. There's no dramatic announcement, no single moment where everything changes. It's gradual, subtle, unpredictable. This is not the wise, composed leader of the X-Men. This is a man losing parts of himself. His mind is slipping. Memories blur, thoughts fracture. Moments of clarity fade into confusion. And what makes it especially painful is that the film allows those moments of clarity to return just long enough for him to understand what is happening. It doesn't protect him from that awareness. For someone whose greatest strength was control, this loss is devastating. It isn't simply decline, it's inversion. The very thing that defined him is now the thing he can no longer hold steady. But it doesn't stop there, because when Xavier loses control, the world around him feels the impact. His episodes are not just medical moments. They become high-risk surges of power, invisible, overwhelming, impossible to ignore. The film visualizes them in a way that feels suffocating rather than explosive. Time slows, bodies lock in place, sound distorts, the environment itself seems to resist movement. When they happen, people freeze, movement stops. Distress spreads through entire spaces like a wave. It's not chaos in the traditional sense, it's paralysis, and that makes it even more unsettling. Imagine having that kind of power and knowing you could harm someone without ever meaning to. That is the fear at the center of Xavier's condition. He is not only experiencing decline, he is dangerous because of it, and he knows it. That awareness is what turns his story into tragedy. Because the concern isn't external, it's internal. It's the fear of becoming harmful despite everything you once stood for. And that conflict is never overstated. It sits beneath his words, beneath his silences, beneath the way he reacts when he realizes the impact of what has happened. And then there are those moments, brief, heartbreaking moments, where the old Xavier returns. Clear, sharp, full of regret. The film gives you just enough of that version to remind you who he was without ever allowing it to last. He remembers what he has lost. He understands what he is becoming. And for a man who once guided others with certainty, that realization is crushing. There is guilt in him, not loud, not overwhelming, but deep, quiet, unavoidable. It's in the pauses, the unfinished thoughts, the way he looks at Logan, as if searching for something that used to be there. And then there is his relationship with Logan. It is no longer simply mentor and student. It has become something more fragile. More painful, there is a reversal happening beneath the surface, roles shifting in a way neither of them fully acknowledges. Logan protects him, but also resents the responsibility. There is frustration in that duty, a sense that he has been left to carry something he never asked for. Xavier depends on Logan, but still believes in the man he used to be, and that belief creates tension. Because Logan no longer sees himself that way. It is a relationship built on history, love, and exhaustion, and every moment between them carries that weight. What makes this portrayal so powerful is that it refuses to preserve the character as an untouchable image. It doesn't protect the memory of who he was. It allows him to be vulnerable in ways that feel almost uncomfortable. It shows him afraid. It shows him confused. It shows him powerless in the one place he was always strongest. And yet, it never takes away his humanity, because even in his weakest moments, Xavier still cares, still hopes, still tries to reach something good in a world that has already moved on. That instinct doesn't disappear, even as everything else begins to fade. That's what makes his story so difficult to watch, not simply because he is nearing the end of his journey, but because he is fading, piece by piece, memory by memory. Until what remains is not the legend we remember, but the man underneath it. And in Logan, that man breaks your heart. She doesn't arrive like a hero. No dramatic entrance, no speech, no explanation, just silence. And then intensity. The way the film introduces her tells you everything about how it wants you to understand her. There is no framing designed to make her instantly familiar or easy to read. She is presented through action first, identity second. In Logan, Laura, also known as X-23, isn't just another character. She is a revelation, a consequence, a question the film refuses to answer easily. Because her existence forces you to confront everything this world has become. Laura isn't born into this world in the usual sense. She is manufactured, created by Transogen, a corporation that didn't simply study mutants, it replaced them. And the film draws a clear contrast here. Where mutants once represented evolution, something natural, unpredictable, beyond control, Transogen represents management, precision, ownership, control. It is evolution stripped of uncertainty and redesigned into something usable. They didn't wait for the future to happen. They built it in a lab, and that shift changes the meaning of everything. Children engineered from the DNA of legends. Raised in captivity, trained for combat scenarios, conditioned to obey. The idea isn't just unsettling, it is methodical. There is a system behind it, a structure that removes individuality in favor of function. Laura is one of them. She has Logan's claws, his instincts, his intensity, but none of his past, and that absence defines her. That is what makes her so unsettling. She is everything Wolverine is without the memory of becoming it. There is no hesitation in her. No moral struggle, no understanding of what she is doing, just action, pure, efficient, unfiltered, and the film doesn't soften that. It allows her confrontations to feel abrupt, almost jarring in their precision. There is no build-up. No hesitation, just immediate response. And yet she is still a child. That contradiction defines her. It creates tension in every scene she enters, because you are constantly aware of two truths existing at the same time, what she has been made into and what she should have been allowed to become. One moment she is silent, watching, absorbing everything. The stillness isn't empty, it is observational. You can feel her processing the world in real time, studying behavior the way someone might study a language they were never taught. The next, she erupts, feral, relentless, impossible to ignore, and the shift isn't gradual. It is immediate, almost jarring, like a switch being flipped. There is no hesitation, no internal debate, just instinct taking over. It isn't heroic, it isn't clean. It is deeply unsettling, because you are not simply watching an intense confrontation. You are watching what happens when a human being is shaped into a tool before they even understand what being human means. That is the real darkness behind Transogen, not simply what they created, but how they created it. The process matters more than the result. This isn't evolution gone wrong. It is intention carried out without empathy. They didn't just take freedom from these children. They took identity. They removed the space where personality forms, where choice exists, where morality develops. Laura doesn't know who she is. She only knows what she was made to do. And that absence defines every action she takes. There is no context behind it, no framework to question it, just conditioning. And that's where her connection to Logan becomes powerful, because Logan remembers. He remembers the pain. The experiments, the loss of control. He remembers what it feels like to be reduced to function instead of treated as human. Laura is living that same story, but from the beginning. She is his past, repeating itself. And the film doesn't treat that as coincidence. It treats it as inevitability, as something that will keep happening unless someone chooses to interrupt it. And suddenly, this isn't just about protecting a girl. It is about stopping the cycle. For the first time, Logan isn't simply facing outside forces. He is confronting what he used to be, through someone who still has a chance to become something else. And that confrontation isn't loud or dramatic. It is internal. It's in the way he reacts to her actions, the way he tries, and often fails, to create boundaries that he himself was never given. There is tension in that, because he doesn't fully believe in change, yet he is being forced to consider it. That's what gives Laura her weight in the story. She is not just the future of mutants. She is the test of whether that future can be different. Can she be more than what she was designed to be? Can she choose who she becomes? Or has she already been shaped too deeply by what was done to her? And the film refuses to offer easy reassurance. It doesn't rush her into innocence or instant redemption. It lets that question linger, unresolved and uncomfortable, alive. Logan doesn't answer that easily, and that is exactly why it works, because Laura isn't just a character. She is a mirror, a warning, and maybe the last chance at something better. It starts with a destination, a place called Eden, a promise. A rumor, maybe even a lie, and the film treats it exactly that way, not as certainty, but as possibility. Something fragile enough to believe in, even if there is no proof. But in Logan, the destination doesn't matter as much as the road, because this isn't just a journey across America. It is a journey through everything these characters are trying to outrun. geography becomes secondary to psychology. Every mile traveled feels like another layer being peeled back. Logan doesn't want to go. He isn't chasing purpose. He isn't answering a call. He is running from responsibility, from the past, from himself. And there is resistance in every decision he makes, as if movement itself is something he resents. But the road doesn't allow him to remain hidden. It has a way of forcing confrontation. Every mile draws something out of him. Every stop pulls him deeper into a struggle he believed he had left behind. There's no clean escape, only a series of moments that demand a response, and he's not alone anymore. There's Xavier, fragile, unpredictable, and carrying a power that can surge at any moment. And there's Laura, silent, watching, learning, becoming. Together they form something unstable. Not a team, not even a family, at least not at first. There's no trust holding them together, no shared understanding, just proximity and necessity. But the road changes that, not through declarations but through accumulation, small moments, repeated exposure. The kind of connection that builds quietly, almost reluctantly. Because survival has a way of stripping everything else away. It reduces choices to their most basic form. There are no grand speeches here, no heroic plans. Just decisions made in the moment. Move, hide, defend, keep going, and always they are being followed. That constant pressure shapes the rhythm of the journey. It never fully relaxes. Even in stillness there is tension. The road is never safe. Every quiet moment feels temporary. Every place they stop carries the same question: how long before they are found? That tension defines the journey. It isn't really about where they're going. It's about whether they'll even make it there. And that uncertainty hangs over everything. There is no guarantee of arrival, no assurance that the destination even exists. And along the way, something unexpected happens. They slow down, just for a moment, a meal, a conversation, a glimpse of something normal. And those moments are framed with a softness the rest of the film rarely allows. Not exaggerated, not romanticized, just present. And that's when the film hits hardest. Because you realize this is what they have been missing. Not victory, not glory, just a life. The kind of life that doesn't involve running, hiding, or constantly surviving. The kind that allows stillness without fear. But the road doesn't allow it. Because in this world, people like them don't get to stay in one place. They don't get to belong. Stability isn't an option, it is a risk. Where they go, danger follows. Not because they seek it, but because they represent something the world has already decided should not exist. So they keep moving. And that movement becomes its own kind of prison. Forward isn't progress, it is necessity. And that's what makes this journey different from most road trip stories. It isn't about discovery, it's about endurance. There's no sense of wonder in the landscape, no curiosity driving them forward. Every mile feels borrowed. Every step ahead feels uncertain. And somewhere in the distance, there is still that idea of Eden. But the truth is, even they don't know if it's real. And that uncertainty gives it meaning, because it isn't just a place, it's an idea. Something to move toward, even when proof is absent. And maybe that's the point, because sometimes the journey isn't about reaching a place. It's about what changes inside you before you get there. You think you know what you're about to watch. Claws, costumes, one final heroic stand, the familiar structure, the expected rhythm, but Logan has no interest in giving you that. It actively resists expectation at every turn, because this isn't a superhero movie. Not in the way we've been trained to expect. It removes the safety net of genre conventions and replaces it with something far less predictable. There's no planet-sized threat, no sky opening above the characters, no massive force waiting for a final showdown, no speeches about destiny, no triumphant music swelling as the hero rises. The absence of those elements isn't accidental, it is intentional. It forces the film to operate on a different level, one that relies on character rather than scale. Instead, you get silence, dust, exhaustion, and a man who doesn't want to keep fighting anymore. That's the first thing Logan does differently. It removes spectacle and replaces it with consequence. In many superhero films, action is often clean, impact without lasting weight, damage without aftermath. Here, every moment lands, not just physically, but emotionally. There is hesitation before engagement. There is recovery afterward. Confrontations don't reset the world, they leave marks on it. Every encounter matters. Every injury stays with you. And more importantly, it stays with him. Logan isn't a symbol here. He isn't an icon. He is a person. And that changes everything. Because once you remove the myths, you are left with something far more uncomfortable. A man who has lived too long, lost too much, and no longer believes in what he used to represent. There's no inspiration in that, at least not in the traditional sense. There is only reality. And that reality is heavy, grounded, and unflinching. This is where the film breaks away from formula. There is no saving the world narrative. The scale is reduced, but the stakes feel higher because they are personal, immediate, irreplaceable. The focus shifts from outcome to intention, not what is being saved, but why it matters to the people involved. And in doing so, the film redefines what a climax even means. Not a spectacle to be witnessed, but a choice to be understood. The stakes are smaller, but they feel heavier. It's not about all of humanity. It's about one life, not about victory, but about survival. And that shift quietly redefines what tension means in a story like this. When everything narrows down to something this personal, there is no distance between the audience and the outcome. You don't watch from above, observing large-scale consequences. You feel pulled into the immediacy of each decision, each risk, each moment that could go wrong. There's no abstraction here, just impact. And that shift is what gives the film its identity. It grounds everything. It removes the safety of scale and replaces it with vulnerability. Even the way it's shot reflects that. The camera doesn't elevate the characters into icons. It stays close, almost uncomfortably close at times. No grand heroic framing, no larger-than-life poses, just grounded, intimate moments. Faces instead of costumes, expressions instead of spectacle. You see the hesitation before action and the aftermath after it, pain instead of power. And that visual approach reinforces the emotional core. This is not about what these characters can do. It's about what they're going through. The action is still there, intense, grounded, undeniable, but it is not the point. It doesn't exist simply to excite. It exists to reveal. Each confrontation tells you something about the characters, their limits, their fears, their instincts. It's messy, it's fast, and it ends without celebration. That's what makes it feel real. It is a consequence of the story, not the reason for it, and that distinction is crucial. Because when action stops being the centerpiece, it becomes something else entirely, something that carries emotional weight instead of only visual impact. That's why Logan feels so different. It doesn't ask, how powerful is the hero? It asks, what remains when that power begins to fade? And that question lingers long after the film moves on from any specific scene. It becomes the lens through which you see everything else. Because once you start looking at a character this way, the usual markers of strength no longer matter. Invincibility loses its appeal. What matters instead is endurance, vulnerability, the ability to keep going when there is nothing left to prove. And that question changes the genre. Because once you see a superhero like this, aging, weakening, human, it becomes difficult to return to the illusion. The illusion that nothing has a cost, that heroes always prevail without consequence, that everything resets when the credits roll. Logan refuses all of that. It doesn't reset. It doesn't soften the impact. It doesn't pretend the story continues forever. It ends, and it treats that ending with finality, not as a transition, but as a conclusion. And in doing so, it becomes something most superhero films rarely allow themselves to be. Real tried to define Logan, and it slips away from simple labels, because this isn't just one kind of story. It resists simplification. It draws from multiple traditions, not to imitate them, but to reshape how they function within this narrative. It's a western, a noir, a road story, a family drama, all layered together into something that doesn't feel like anything else in the genre. At its core, this is a western, and not the romanticized version, but the reflective, late-era western. The kind that looks back at what came before and questions it. Logan is the aging gunslinger, a man whose time has passed, someone who once defined the landscape but now exists on its edges. A relic moving through open spaces that feel both vast and isolating. There are no saloons, no duels at high noon, but the feeling is there, the sense of distance, of loneliness stretching across the horizon. Conflict that arrives suddenly and ends with weight without ceremony. This is the final ride, not toward victory, but toward closure. The journey of someone who knows there isn't another chapter waiting on the other side. Then there's the noir element, not just in how the story looks, but in how it thinks. The moral clarity you expect from traditional hero narratives is gone, replaced with ambiguity, with doubt. Logan isn't a hero here. He's a man weighed down by guilt, trying to outrun a past that refuses to stay behind, and the world around him reflects that internal state. It feels worn down, compromised. There's no clear right or wrong. Just choices made under pressure and consequences that follow whether you're ready for them or not. That's noir, a story where redemption is uncertain, and the past isn't something you escape, it's something you carry. And then there's the road. Movement defines this film, not as freedom but as necessity. They don't stay anywhere for long. They can't. Stillness becomes dangerous. Every stop is temporary. Every moment of peace feels borrowed, like something that could disappear at any second. The journey becomes the story, not where they're going, but what happens along the way. Each mile reveals something. Each encounter shifts the dynamic between them, and the further they travel, the closer they get to something they can't avoid. Not just a destination, but a reckoning. But underneath all of it is something quieter, something more human, a fractured version of a family, not defined by blood or choice but by circumstance. Logan, the reluctant protector. Xavier, the fading father figure. Laura, the child who never had the chance to simply be one. They don't come together out of love. There's no immediate bond, no emotional clarity. They are brought together by necessity, by survival. But over time, something shifts, not dramatically, not all at once. Small moments, a shared meal, a pause in conversation, a glance that lingers just a little longer than it once did, and those moments begin to build. And suddenly, this isn't just about survival anymore. It's about connection, about what it means to care, even when you don't want to, even when you're convinced it will end in loss. The film doesn't rush that transformation. It allows it to emerge naturally, almost reluctantly, as if the characters themselves are resisting it even as it happens. All of this working together is what makes Logan feel so distinct. It doesn't commit to a single genre. It blends them seamlessly. The solitude of a Western, the weight of noir, the movement of a road story, the emotion of a family narrative, each layer reinforcing the others, none of them overwhelming the story, but all of them shaping it. All centered around a character we thought we already understood, but the truth is we didn't, because we had only seen the myth, the version shaped by spectacle and expectation. And Logan, it removes that layer. It shows us the person. Not as a hero, not as a legend, but as something far more powerful human. From the very first moments of Logan, you can feel it. Something is off, not loud, not dramatic, just heavy. And that weight isn't explained, it's felt. It's in the pacing, in the quiet spaces between dialogue, in the way scenes don't rush to resolve themselves. This isn't the kind of darkness that comes from spectacle or visible threats. It's quieter than that, more persistent. It lingers in the air. In the silence between conversations, in the way characters look at each other and then look away, because this world isn't falling apart, it already did, and that distinction shapes everything that follows. There's no escalation toward collapse. No sense of an approaching disaster. That moment has already passed. What you're watching now is what comes after, the aftermath, the residue of something that has already ended. That's what defines the tone of Logan. It doesn't build toward a breaking point. It begins beyond it, and that creates a sense of emotional stillness that feels almost suffocating. There's no easy optimism here, no sense that everything will improve, just survival. And even that feels temporary, like something that could slip away at any moment. This is a film that fully embraces maturity, not just in its intensity, but in its perspective. It doesn't simplify emotion. It doesn't offer easy reassurance. It understands something many superhero stories avoid. Sometimes there is no clear victory, not in the way we expect. There is no moment where everything is restored, where loss is undone, where the world returns to what it once was. Characters don't act because they are certain they will succeed. They act because there is nothing else left to do, because standing still isn't an option. Because giving up would mean accepting something they are not ready to face. That's where the heaviness comes from, not as cynicism, but as honesty. The world feels worn down. The characters feel worn down. Even the idea of hope feels distant, not gone, but fragile, difficult to hold on to. Logan doesn't believe in it, not anymore, and the film never tries to force that belief back with simple answers or sudden shifts. There are no grand speeches, no single moment where everything becomes clear, just fragments, small, delicate moments where something human breaks through, a gesture, a word, a look, and then fades again, leaving behind just enough to remind you it existed. That's what makes this tone so powerful. It doesn't push emotion. It allows it to grow, slowly, quietly. Sadness builds in the background. Regret lingers in the spaces between action. Nothing is rushed. Nothing is exaggerated. And because of that, when those emotions finally rise to the surface, they feel earned. Pain isn't something the characters move past, it's something they carry. And the film never lets you forget that. It doesn't isolate suffering into moments that can be left behind once a scene ends. It stays, it builds. You see it in posture, in hesitation, in the way characters react to situations that once felt routine but no longer do. Even silence begins to feel heavy, like it's filled with everything left unsaid. The past isn't background here, it's presence. Even the action reflects this. It isn't stylized, it isn't designed to impress. It's direct, unrefined, uncomfortable, and it leaves a mark, not just visually but emotionally. There's no choreography meant to showcase skill. Movements feel reactive, imperfect, because survival isn't graceful, it's urgent. And that imperfection is exactly what makes it feel real, because in this world, nothing resets. There's no clean separation between action and consequence. They exist together, always. Every action carries weight, every loss stays with you, and the film reinforces that not through explanation but through accumulation. The way characters shift slightly after each encounter, the way exhaustion builds. The way decisions grow heavier because they are no longer hypothetical, they are shaped by everything that has already happened. That's what makes Logan feel so different. It treats its characters like people, not symbols, people who age, who break, who make choices they can't undo, and who have to live with those choices long after the moment has passed. And that maturity gives the film something rare, authenticity, not just in tone, but in perspective. It doesn't simplify human experience into clean arcs of struggle and resolution. It allows contradiction. It allows doubt. It allows moments where characters don't know what the right choice is and act anyway. This isn't a story about light overcoming darkness. It's a story about finding meaning within the darkness, about continuing, not because everything will improve, but because stopping would mean losing something essential. And that's why it stays with you, because when it ends, you don't feel lifted. You feel changed, not in a dramatic way, but in something quieter, a shift in how you process what you've seen, a lingering awareness of the weight these characters carry and how little of it is ever fully resolved. For years, Wolverine felt restrained, not just in terms of content, but in how far the films were willing to explore what he truly represented. You saw the claws, you saw the confrontations, but you never fully saw what those claws were meant to do. In Logan, that restraint is gone, completely. This is Wolverine unfiltered, and it doesn't feel like escalation. It feels like honesty finally catching up to the character. The R rating isn't there for effect. It's a release, not in the sense of excess, but in the removal of limitation. For the first time, the film doesn't soften the impact. It doesn't cut away. It doesn't reframe intensity to make it easier to absorb. When Logan engages in conflict, you feel it. There's no distance between action and consequence. Every strike carries weight. Every movement feels urgent. Every injury matters. The camera doesn't turn away because the film wants you to confront what's happening, not simply watch it. The claws are no longer symbolic. They leave visible impact. They leave consequences behind. And the film doesn't hide that. But what matters most is how that intensity is framed. It isn't presented as empowerment. It isn't something to celebrate. It's something to endure. Because here's the key difference. This intensity isn't there just to shock you. It's there to remind you what Logan really is. A weapon, not a symbol, not a polished hero. A weapon shaped through experience. And now, without limitations, that truth becomes impossible to ignore. But what makes this even more unsettling is how the film treats the aftermath. In many superhero films, conflict resets. The scene ends, the hero moves on, and everything continues as if nothing lasting occurred. Here, nothing resets. Logan bleeds. He struggles to recover. He slows down. Recovery isn't implied, it's shown, and it's incomplete. Every confrontation takes something from him, and that changes how you experience the action. You're not simply waiting for him to overcome the situation. You're watching the toll build in real time. You're measuring survival against decline. Then there's Laura, and this is where the film becomes even more unsettling, because the same intensity you see in Logan exists in her, but she's a child, and that fact never stops feeling uncomfortable, no matter how familiar you become with her presence. Her actions are faster, sharper, more instinctive. They don't carry hesitation or reflection, they are immediate. And that contrast between innocence and intensity hits harder than anything else in the film, because it removes the comfort of experience. Logan's actions come from history. Laura's come from design. It forces you to confront something difficult. What happens when intensity isn't learned over time, but built into someone from the beginning? When it isn't a response to experience, but the result of it, that question sits beneath every scene she appears in, and the film doesn't try to resolve it. It allows it to exist, unanswered, heavy. That's where the realism comes in. This isn't stylized action. It isn't arranged to look impressive. It's messy, unpredictable, unforgiving, and it refuses to glamorize what's happening, because every confrontation leaves a mark, on the body, on the mind, on the story itself. There is no separation between physical impact and emotional consequence. They happen together, always. That's what makes Logan different. It doesn't use intensity as spectacle. It uses it as truth. A truth about who these characters are and what they've been shaped into. And once you see Wolverine like this, raw, direct, and grounded, there's no going back, because this isn't just action anymore, it's consequence. In many superhero films, action is the reward. The build-up ends, the music rises, and the confrontation begins as a release. But in Logan, the action doesn't feel like a reward, it feels like a cost. Something that has to be paid every time it happens. Every time Logan engages, it isn't because he wants to, it's because he has to, and that distinction removes any sense of spectacle from the moment. There's no excitement in his eyes. No sense of thrill, no feeling of invulnerability, just urgency, pain, and the awareness that this will take something from him that he cannot regain. Because in this film, every confrontation carries something with it. a consequence, a loss. A piece of the character being worn down. You're not watching a hero dominate a situation. You're watching a man endure it, and endurance looks different. It's slower, heavier, less certain. Logan doesn't move through conflict effortlessly. He struggles, he falters, he bleeds, and the longer it continues, the more you feel it, not just visually but emotionally. Fatigue builds, tension tightens. You become aware of how close everything is to breaking. That's what gives these moments their weight. They aren't isolated displays. They are extensions of the story. They carry forward everything that has already happened and add to it. When Logan faces conflict, you feel his exhaustion, his frustration, his refusal to stop, even when continuing feels almost impossible. There's no clean resolution, just continuation. And then there's Laura. Her approach is the opposite. Fast, precise, explosive. She doesn't hesitate, she doesn't pause, she simply acts. And that contrast between Logan's weariness and Laura's intensity adds another layer to every encounter. It becomes a visual representation of time, of experience versus instinct, of what intensity looks like at the beginning and what it becomes over time. It isn't just action, it's character, two versions of the same instinct at completely different stages of life. But what truly elevates these moments is everything surrounding them, the quiet before, the silence after, the absence of guiding music that would normally shape your response. Because the film always reminds you this isn't just a sequence of action. Something has changed, someone has been affected, something has been lost. That's why the action in Logan feels so different. It isn't there to excite you. It's there to make you feel something. Tension, unease, sadness, even regret. Because every time Logan extends those claws, you aren't thinking, this is going to be exciting. You're thinking, how much more can he endure? And that question never really leaves you. It lingers, quietly reshaping every moment of intensity. Even before anything happens, you are already anticipating what comes after. Not the resolution, but the cost. And that anticipation transforms the entire experience. It turns every confrontation into something tense, almost uncomfortable, because you aren't watching for victory. You're watching for consequence. There's something you begin to notice while watching Logan, not immediately, but gradually. The film takes its time. It doesn't rush to pull you in. It allows scenes to settle, to breathe, to exist without urgency. Moments linger. Silence is allowed to remain, and at first that feels deliberate, not excessive but purposeful. Because this is a story about aging, about exhaustion, about people who are no longer moving at the pace they once did, so the pacing reflects that. It mirrors the internal state of the characters. Everything feels heavier, slower, more deliberate. You aren't being pulled forward by constant motion. You are being asked to sit with the characters, to exist in the same space they do, to feel what they are feeling, not just observe it. And that creates a kind of immersion that is rare in this genre. You aren't escaping into the story, you are settling into it. And for a while that works. It builds atmosphere, it deepens emotion, it gives weight to the world. It allows moments to resonate instead of rushing past them. You notice details you might otherwise miss, the way a character pauses before speaking, the way silence carries meaning, but then something begins to shift. The same stillness that once felt immersive begins to stretch just a little too far. You begin to feel the length, not in a dramatic or disengaging way, but in a subtle shift in momentum. Moments that should land begin to linger just a little longer than expected. The emotional beat arrives, but the scene doesn't move on. It holds, and then holds a little more. And gradually that accumulation starts to shape the rhythm. You reach a point where it feels like the film is approaching its ending, and then it continues, and continues. The narrative doesn't break, but it extends. The journey doesn't just feel long for the characters. It begins to feel long for the audience as well. And that's where the pacing becomes a double-edged sword, because what gives the film its depth also risks slowing its momentum. The same patience that allows emotional weight to develop can also create a sense of drag when it isn't balanced with forward movement. The repetition adds to that feeling. Move forward, get pursued, engage, pause, repeat. Even when each sequence is crafted with care, the pattern becomes noticeable. And once you recognize a pattern, it changes how you engage with it. You stop reacting instinctively and start anticipating structurally. And by the final stretch, you can feel it. There's a sense that the film has already expressed what it needed to express, that the emotional arc has reached its peak. The core themes have been introduced, explored, and reinforced. But the story continues, adding more intensity, more confrontation, more time. And instead of strengthening the ending, it slightly softens its impact. Not because the additional moments lack quality, but because they arrive after a point where the emotional resolution already feels complete. It's not that the film extends dramatically, it's that it stretches just enough to ease the sharpness of what came before. That doesn't mean the pacing lacks purpose. In many ways, it is what allows the film to breathe. it creates space. Space for character moments, for quiet reflection, for emotional development that many films move past too quickly. It gives the story texture. It allows you to feel time passing, not just watch events unfold. But it also asks for patience. This isn't a story that moves quickly. It moves deliberately, and whether that works for you depends on what you expect from it. If you're looking for constant forward momentum, you may feel the drag. The pauses may feel like interruptions rather than intention. But if you're willing to sit with it, to let the story unfold at its own pace, you begin to understand why it moves the way it does. Because it isn't trying to engage you through constant bursts, it's trying to stay with you through moments. Because this isn't a sprint, it's a long, steady walk toward something inevitable. And like everything else in Logan, even the pacing reminds you, nothing here comes easily, not even the ending. At first, the tension holds. In Logan, the sense of danger feels constant, unpredictable. There's a feeling that at any moment something could shift. They're moving, they're hiding, they're trying to stay one step ahead, and it works because it feels like they are being pursued. The threat isn't distant, it's persistent. Always just behind them, gradually closing the distance. But as the journey continues, you begin to notice a pattern. Move forward, get found, confront, escape, then repeat. And repetition, while thematically appropriate, begins to shape the tension in a different way. At first, each encounter feels intense. The stakes are high, the energy is grounded, but over time, the structure begins to echo itself. And repetition, even when executed well, can shift perception. Different place, similar outcome, a new setting but a familiar rhythm. The antagonist's close in, Logan responds, they narrowly move on. And while each sequence is thoughtfully constructed, the repetition begins to take something away, not from the quality of the scenes themselves, but from the unpredictability that once defined them, because tension relies on uncertainty, on the feeling that anything could happen, and once you recognize the pattern, you begin to anticipate it. You understand how it plays out. That sense of danger gradually becomes expectation. And expectation, while still engaging, doesn't carry the same intensity as uncertainty. It isn't that the scenes lose their impact. They remain strong. The performances remain grounded. But the structure beneath them starts to feel more mechanical, as if the story continues moving without evolving its approach. The variation comes from circumstance, not from structure. This becomes more noticeable in the later portions of the film. Moments that should feel like turning points instead feel like variations of the same cycle. The emotional stakes may be higher, but the pattern remains familiar. And when the film reaches what feels like its natural conclusion, it continues. One more pursuit, one more confrontation, one more sequence. And instead of elevating the story, it slightly repeats it. That's where the impact softens. Not dramatically, but enough to be felt. Because by that point, you're no longer asking what will happen next. You're asking when it will happen again. And that subtle shift changes your engagement. Still intense, still carefully crafted, but just a little less surprising. That's the trade-off. The repetition reinforces the idea of constant pressure, that there is no safe space, no moment of complete rest, but it also risks making that pressure predictable. And in a story built on tension, predictability can soften the edge, because even in a story about endurance, you still need to feel like anything could happen, not just the same thing one more time. For all its strength, Logan isn't without imperfections. In fact, the deeper you look, the more you begin to notice the small cracks. They don't break the film, but they do reveal the limits of its structure. At first, they are easy to overlook because the film draws you in. The performances are compelling. The tone is immersive. The emotion feels genuine. It's easy to stay within that experience, but once you step back, questions begin to surface. Small ones at first, subtle inconsistencies, moments where logic bends slightly to allow the story to continue. How do certain events unfold without attracting attention? How do characters move through spaces that feel like they should be more controlled? The film doesn't always stop to explain, and sometimes that works in its favor. It keeps the focus on emotion rather than mechanics. But in other moments, that absence of clarity creates small gaps, not large enough to disrupt the experience, but noticeable if you're paying close attention. And those gaps remind you that even a film this grounded still relies on narrative convenience at times. It's a delicate balance between maintaining realism and sustaining momentum, and occasionally you can sense where that balance shifts. Why do some moments move quickly, while others take their time? And then there are larger questions. Details that feel underexplained. You begin to notice how selectively the film reveals its world. The pieces are present, just enough to form an outline, but rarely assembled into a complete picture. The world feels rich, but not always fully defined. You're told what things are, but not always how they came to be. And that creates an interesting dynamic. You're aware that there is more beneath the surface, but the film chooses not to explore it fully. Certain elements are introduced and then left open, not because they were forgotten, but because they were never the focus. The film prioritizes immediacy over explanation, character over context. And that choice can be both a strength and a limitation. On one hand, it keeps the story grounded, focused on the characters, free from heavy exposition that might interrupt the emotional flow. It trusts the audience to connect the dots, to accept that not everything needs to be explained. But on the other, it leaves spaces, moments where the logic doesn't fully connect, where the absence of explanation isn't intriguing but noticeable, and that distinction matters. Because mystery invites curiosity, but absence can sometimes invite doubt. Take the idea of Eden. Is it real? Is it myth? Is it hope or illusion? The film never fully answers, and thematically, that ambiguity works. It reinforces the idea that belief itself can drive people forward, even without certainty. But structurally, it can also create distance. Because without grounding, the destination risks feeling more symbolic than tangible. Then there are the mechanics of the story itself, how the characters move, how they are tracked, how certain situations unfold. The logistics behind survival, pursuit, escape. Sometimes it all fits together, feels organic, seamless, but other times it feels a little too convenient or not fully developed. Moments where the story needs something to happen, and it does without fully establishing how it happens. And those moments, while brief, stand out more in a film that otherwise feels so grounded. Even the structure of the world, how things changed, how mutants disappeared, is more suggested than fully explained. You get fragments, hints, enough to understand the outcome, but not always the full process behind it. And for some viewers that works, because the film isn't about systems, it's about the people inside them. The emotional reality matters more than the logistical one, but for others, those missing details stand out. They create a sense that something is incomplete, not broken but unfinished. It creates a tension between what the film shows and what it leaves unsaid, and depending on how you experience it, that tension can either deepen the mystery or reveal a weakness. It can feel intentional, or it can feel like something is missing, and that duality becomes part of the viewing experience. You're constantly navigating between what is given and what is withheld. But here's the important part: none of these imperfections take the film apart. They don't erase the emotion. They don't weaken the performances. They don't undo the core story. What they do is remind you that even something this strong is still imperfect, that even a film this carefully constructed has edges that aren't perfectly smooth, and maybe that's fitting. Because just like its main character, Logan isn't flawless either. It carries its own marks, its own inconsistencies, and in a strange way, that imperfection makes it feel more aligned with the story it's telling. They weren't meant to come together, not like this. In Logan, Xavier, and Laura don't begin as a family. They begin as survivors, three people connected by circumstance, held together by necessity. There is no emotional foundation at the start, no shared purpose beyond getting through the next moment. Logan doesn't want responsibility, not because he cannot handle it, but because he has spent so long avoiding it. Xavier cannot function without support. His dependence isn't symbolic, it is immediate. And Laura doesn't yet understand what she is. She exists without context, without guidance, without a sense of identity beyond action. There is no warmth at the beginning, no bond, no trust, just tension, frustration, distance. Conversations are brief, reactions are guarded. Every interaction feels like it could break instead of build, and yet something begins to change. Not all at once, not through a single defining moment, but gradually, through small interactions, shared space, repeated proximity, the kind of connection that forms not through intention but through experience. Logan protects Laura not because he cares at first, but because he must. Responsibility comes before emotion, but over time, that responsibility begins to shift, not into open affection but into something quieter. A sense of care that no longer feels forced. Xavier speaks to Logan, not just as a mentor, but as someone who still believes there is something left in him. That belief becomes a kind of pressure. A reminder of a version of himself Logan no longer recognizes, and Laura watches. She learns, she listens, she absorbs everything around her, not just behavior but tone, emotion, reaction. She builds her understanding of the world piece by piece, and in those quiet moments you begin to see something forming, not a perfect family, but something real, something fragile, a broken version of it. One that doesn't rely on traditional roles but still reflects them in subtle ways. Logan becomes the reluctant father, not nurturing, not gentle, but present, and presence here matters more than warmth. Xavier becomes something closer to a fading patriarch, still thoughtful, still compassionate, but fragile in ways that shift the dynamic. and Laura, she becomes the child who was never allowed to simply be one. Learning what it means to exist beyond function. That's what makes this dynamic so powerful. It isn't built on love. It is built on damage. Three people carrying their own burdens, finding something in each other, without ever saying it out loud. There are no declarations, no single moment where everything changes, just accumulation, small shifts that eventually become something meaningful. There is a moment where they sit together, share a meal, exist like a normal family. And for a brief second it feels possible, not idealized, not perfect but possible, like maybe this could have been their life, a version of it at least, but it cannot last, and the film never pretends it can. Because this isn't a story about fixing everything. It's a story about holding on to something, even when you know it won't last. That's what makes their connection so impactful. They don't get time, they don't get stability. They only get moments, and those moments carry everything, because they are rare, because they are fragile, because they exist in contrast to everything else. For Logan, this is the closest he has come to having a family. Not in a traditional sense, but in something immediate. For Xavier, it is a reminder of what once existed, of a time when connection felt stable, when purpose felt clear. And for Laura, it is the first time she experiences anything close to belonging, not as an idea, but as a feeling. That is why their bond matters, not because it is perfect, but because it exists at all. In a world that has taken so much from them, they still find each other, and sometimes that is enough. Strip away the claws, strip away the confrontations, strip away the myth, and what remains in Logan are questions, not about power. Not about victory, but about meaning, about what remains when everything external fades, when identity is no longer defined by action, but by reflection. For the first time, Logan can face an end, not as a distant possibility, but as something real. His body is weakening, his strength is fading, every step forward feels uncertain, and the film doesn't treat that as a twist, it treats it as truth, something unavoidable. And suddenly, Wolverine is no longer untouchable, he is finite, and that realization reframes everything. Because when a man who once seemed unbreakable realizes he isn't, every choice begins to matter. Not in scale, but in intention. But it isn't the idea of an ending that weighs on him most. It's the past, the accumulation of everything that came before, every person he couldn't protect, every life shaped by his actions. Every moment where control slipped away. Logan doesn't just remember it, he carries it, not as something he can undo, but as something he has to live with. And in a quieter world, with no larger conflict to focus on, that weight becomes louder. There's nothing left to distract him from it, no external struggle to drown it out, no mission to justify it, no chaos to bury it beneath, just time. And in that stillness, the past becomes impossible to ignore. So the question becomes, can someone like Logan find redemption? Not in the way stories usually define it, not through a final act that erases everything that came before, but through something smaller, something quieter. Something that doesn't rewrite his history, but gives it a different ending, protecting one life, Laura, not because he believes he deserves redemption, but because it is the one thing left he can do. There is no illusion here that this balances everything. The film never suggests that one good choice cancels out a lifetime of consequences. Instead, it reshapes the idea of redemption entirely. It becomes less about erasing the past and more about choosing differently in the present, acting with intention instead of instinct. And maybe that is enough, not to fix everything, but to matter, because redemption in this story comes at a cost. It isn't given, it is earned, through sacrifice, through letting go of something that cannot be replaced. There are no easy victories, no clean resolutions. Every step forward requires something in return: strain, loss, acceptance. And the closer Logan moves toward doing the right thing, the more it asks of him. There is a sense of inevitability to that exchange, as if the story itself understands that nothing meaningful comes without consequence. That is the reality this film embraces. You don't find peace without giving something up, and even then, peace is never permanent. It is momentary, fragile, something you reach for, not something you keep. And in the end, it all leads to one final question. What do you leave behind? Not the legend, not the stories people tell, not the version of you that lives in memory, but the impact, the part of you that continues through others. Who did you protect? Who did you influence? What continues after you are gone? Logan was many things: a weapon, a fighter, a survivor, roles shaped by circumstance, identities he carried because he had no alternative. But through Laura, through that final choice, he becomes something else. Not a hero in the traditional sense, not a myth renewed, but a beginning, not for himself, but for someone else. And that shift is what completes his story. Because legacy is not about how long you endure. It is about what remains when you are gone. And in Logan, what remains is not the legend of Wolverine. It is the choice he made at the end, to do something that finally held meaning. something not driven by instinct or survival but by purpose. There's a quiet tension running through Logan. You can feel it in every scene, not just survival, not just danger, but transition. Something is ending, not suddenly, not dramatically, but gradually, and at the same time, something else is trying to begin, uncertain, fragile, undefined. Logan represents the past, a time when mutants stood for something larger, when they symbolized change, when there was direction, meaning, purpose behind their existence. But that world is gone, not erased in a single moment, but worn away over time. All that remains are memories, regret, and scars that never fully healed. Logan isn't just older, he is out of time. The way he thinks, the way he acts, the way he survives, it all belongs to a world that no longer exists, and that disconnect shapes everything about him. Because no matter how strong he once was, the past doesn't prepare you for what comes next. It doesn't adapt. It doesn't evolve. It lingers. Then there is Laura. She is not part of that past. She didn't grow up with the same ideals, the same sense of identity. She didn't experience what mutants once represented: the hope, the purpose, the belief that being different could mean something meaningful. She was created differently, engineered, controlled, defined before she ever had the chance to define herself. She is the future, but not the one anyone expected. Not something that emerged naturally, but something that was constructed, and that difference matters, because it changes the foundation of who she is. She carries everything Logan once was: the ability, the instinct, the capability, but without the history that gave it meaning. She has the potential, but not the context. And when these two come together, past and future, something has to shift. Logan sees himself in Laura, not the version people admired, not the image, but the truth beneath it, the instinct, the intensity. The part of himself he spent a lifetime trying to escape, and that recognition is immediate, unavoidable, because it forces him to confront something he has never fully resolved. And suddenly, this is no longer just about protecting her. It is about ensuring she does not become what he became. That is the real conflict, not against external forces, not against the world, but against repetition, against the idea that the next generation is destined to carry the same weight, the same mistakes, the same loss of control. Throughout the film, you can feel the shift happening, subtle but constant, the old world fading, the new one uncertain. Logan is breaking down, Laura is just beginning, and somewhere between them there is a moment of transfer, not of power, but of purpose, something intangible, something that cannot be passed physically, but can be shaped through action. Logan doesn't belong to the future. That possibility is gone, but he can influence it. He can leave something behind that alters its direction, even slightly, and that is what gives his journey meaning, because this is not about holding on to what was. It is about letting it go, so something new can take its place. In the end, Logan is not the future. He is the bridge between what was and what might be. And Laura, she is the question, the uncertainty that defines everything that comes next. Will the future repeat the past, or finally become something different? Logan doesn't offer a simple answer. It doesn't resolve that uncertainty, but it shows something more powerful, that every generation has a choice. And sometimes the hardest part is allowing the next one to make it. Beneath the surface of Logan, there is another story unfolding, quieter, less visible, one that is not told through action or dialogue, but through the world itself, through what is present and what is missing, because this is not just a future where mutants disappeared, it is a future where they were controlled. In earlier stories, mutants were feared, misunderstood, rejected for being different. The conflict was visible, open, defined by confrontation, but in this world that fear didn't vanish. It evolved, it became more calculated, more precise. Instead of open conflict, there is quiet removal, no public struggle. No widespread panic, just a system that gradually eliminates difference until it no longer exists. And the most unsettling part, no one questions it. There is no large-scale resistance, no visible awareness, just acceptance. Or perhaps indifference. And that silence says more than any conflict ever could, because it suggests that the system didn't just remove mutants, it removed the need to even acknowledge them. This is where the film moves from fear to something deeper: control. The idea that humanity didn't simply reject mutation, it chose to manage it, to regulate it, to reshape it into something predictable, something contained. Mutants were no longer allowed to evolve naturally. That unpredictability was seen as a risk, so it was replaced. They were engineered, designed in controlled environments, built from DNA, created not as individuals but as products, and that changes everything. Because once life becomes something that can be designed, it also becomes something that can be owned. Identity stops being something you discover and becomes something assigned. Purpose is no longer chosen, it is given. And in that kind of world, the idea of freedom doesn't disappear. It becomes harder to define. Because once life becomes something you can manufacture, it becomes easier to detach from it, easier to shape it, easier to control it. It shifts from something inherent to something constructed, and that shift changes how it is valued. When creation becomes a process instead of a mystery, it becomes easier to justify altering it, guiding it, managing it, and that's where the film draws its quiet line, not in what is possible, but in what is permitted. That's the reality Laura comes from. She wasn't born into a world. She was created for a purpose, defined before she had the chance to define herself, trained, conditioned, shaped into something before she ever had a choice. Her existence isn't accidental, it is intentional, designed with precision, and that precision removes uncertainty, but it also removes freedom, and that raises the film's most uncomfortable question. If someone is designed to be a weapon, do they ever get to become anything else, not just in theory, but in practice? Can identity be reshaped after it has been imposed so completely? Or does that original design always remain beneath the surface, influencing every decision, every reaction, every instinct? That's the deeper tragedy behind Transigen. It isn't just what they created, it's what they took away. Choice. Identity, the freedom to become something on your own, the ability to make mistakes, to learn, to grow, all of it replaced by programming. These children aren't just controlled physically, they are shaped before they even understand who they are. Their lives are structured before they begin, their paths defined before they can question them, and that's what gives the story its weight, because this isn't distant science fiction, it feels like a reflection of what happens when progress moves faster than morality, when capability outpaces responsibility, when understanding the human genome becomes a tool, not just for healing, but for designing people, for shaping outcomes instead of allowing them to emerge. The film doesn't present this as a distant future. It presents it as something uncomfortably close, something that doesn't require a leap in imagination, just a shift in priorities. This idea has always been part of the mutant story, a metaphor for those who are different, those who don't fit, those who are judged before they are understood, but Logan takes it further. It removes visible conflict and replaces it with something more subtle. It asks, what happens when society stops fearing difference and starts eliminating it entirely, not through open confrontation but through control? Through systems so quiet you barely notice them, and that's what makes it so unsettling, because it doesn't look like oppression, it looks like progress, clean, efficient, organized. A world where everything works, but something essential has been removed. That's why this idea lingers, because it doesn't feel distant, it feels possible. A world where people are shaped before they are born, where identity is assigned instead of discovered, where the future isn't something we grow into, but something decided in advance. Logan doesn't emphasize this loudly. It lets it exist beneath everything, quiet, uncomfortable, but impossible to ignore, because the real danger in this world isn't just what has been created. It's the idea that someone believed they had the right to create it. For nearly 2 decades, one name became inseparable from one character. Hugh Jackman is Wolverine, not just because he portrayed him, but because he lived him, across years, across films. Across different versions of the same character, he carried Wolverine through it all, through shifting tones, through evolving storytelling, through an entire era of cinema that changed around him. And in Logan, he doesn't simply return to the role one last time, he completes it. This isn't the Wolverine we are used to. There is no confidence, no sense of control, no feeling that he is fully in command. What Jackman delivers here is something far more difficult, vulnerability, not surface-level weakness, but something internal, something that shapes every movement, every choice, every reaction. You see it in the way he moves, slow, heavy. Deliberate, every step feels like effort. Every action feels like it takes something from him. There is no exaggeration in the physicality, it feels restrained, grounded, real. This is a man who is tired, not just physically, but emotionally. And Jackman does not hide that. He leans into it completely. He allows the character to feel worn down in a way that never feels forced. There is intensity in this performance, but it is not explosive. It is contained, sharp, constant. The kind of intensity that doesn't need to be expressed loudly because it is always present. It shapes his tone, his posture, the way he interacts with the world. It is less about reaction and more about what remains after everything he has carried. Then there is the guilt, and this is where the performance deepens. Jackman portrays Logan as someone who does not believe he deserves peace, and that belief influences everything. It shapes his isolation, his defensiveness, his refusal to connect. He avoids people not because he doesn't need them, but because he believes they are better off without him. He keeps distance, withdraws wherever he can, not out of cruelty, but out of fear. Fear of what happens if he stops running. If he allows himself to feel everything he has been holding back, that fear is never directly stated. It is implied, and that is what makes it so effective. And yet, beneath all of that, something remains, something human. Something not completely worn away. You see it in the quieter moments, a glance that lingers, a pause before walking away, a decision he does not want to make but makes anyway. These moments are small, but they carry weight. Because they reveal the part of him that still exists beneath everything else. That is where the performance becomes powerful, because Logan is not trying to be a hero. He is trying not to be one. He resists it, avoids it, rejects it. And Jackman captures that tension perfectly. The reluctance, the resistance, the slow, difficult shift toward doing what is right. There is no dramatic transformation, no sudden clarity, no moment where everything becomes certain. Just a man gradually remembering who he once was, not with pride but with hesitation, and choosing almost against his own instincts to act on it. That kind of performance requires restraint, control, trust in silence. The ability to express conflict without relying on words, and Jackman delivers it. He allows the character to exist in the spaces between dialogue, where emotion is not spoken but still felt. Even in the moments of action, he does not present Logan as invincible. He presents him as someone enduring, pushing forward not to prove something, but because he has no other choice. There is urgency in every movement. A sense that failure is not an option, not because of pride, but because of consequence. And that makes every moment feel grounded, because you are not watching a character display heroism. You are watching a man move toward it step by step, and that difference changes everything about how the performance is experienced. That's what makes this performance stand apart from everything that came before. It isn't the loudest. It isn't the most explosive, but it is the most honest. It doesn't rely on scale or spectacle. It relies on presence, on subtlety, on emotional truth. And when it's over, you don't feel like you've just watched a great superhero performance. You feel like you've said goodbye to someone who felt real. Someone who existed beyond the screen because the performance allowed them to. Because in the end, Hugh Jackman didn't just portray Wolverine, he gave him an ending that mattered. For years, Patrick Stewart's Charles Xavier was the voice of calm, the moral center, the teacher, the man who always seemed to have the answer. And for years, that portrayal carried a quiet authority, controlled, measured, almost untouchable. There was stability in his presence, a sense that no matter what happened, he would remain composed. But in Logan, that version of Xavier is gone. What we are given instead is something far more difficult to witness. A man losing control of the one thing that once defined him, his mind. And what makes Stewart's performance so powerful is that he doesn't protect the character. He doesn't preserve the image we remember. He allows it to fracture, to unravel, to become uncertain. There are moments of confusion, of fear, of frustration that doesn't have a clear direction. And those moments aren't exaggerated, they are restrained, fragile, which makes them feel even more real. Xavier is no longer composed. He is unpredictable, and for someone who once guided everything with precision, that loss is devastating. But Stewart doesn't present him as diminished. He presents him as human. And that distinction gives the performance its depth. There is no attempt to reduce Xavier to a symbol of decline. Instead, he becomes something more personal, someone experiencing the loss of something essential. Because beneath the confusion, beneath the fragility, the Xavier we remember is still there. Not gone, just harder to reach. You see it in brief flashes, moments of clarity. Moments where his voice steadies, his presence returns, and for a second, he becomes who he once was. And those moments carry immense weight, not because they last, but because they don't. They arrive unexpectedly, fully formed, and then disappear just as quickly. And that impermanence is what makes them so powerful, because you recognize what has been lost at the exact moment it briefly returns. That is the tragedy. Stewart gives Xavier layers we have never seen before. Regret that is not spoken loudly, but felt in hesitation. Guilt that lingers in the way he reflects on the past. Even a quiet frustration, not directed outward, but inward. At what he has become, at what he can no longer control. There are moments where he is not simply guiding Logan, he is challenging him, confronting him, pushing him to face the person he has become. And it is not gentle, it is direct. Unfiltered, there is urgency in it, as if he knows time is limited and there is no space left for restraint. There is pain in that urgency, not just physical but emotional, because Xavier remembers enough to understand what has been lost. And that awareness, partial, inconsistent, but present, is overwhelming. It creates a tension within him. One moment he is calm, the next he is overwhelmed, not by the world but by his own mind shifting beyond his control. And Stewart makes every shift feel natural, seamless. There is no exaggeration, no overstatement, just subtle changes, a tremor in his voice, a flicker in his eyes, a pause that lingers slightly longer than expected. The kind of details that do not draw attention but remain with you. That is what makes it feel real, because it does not present itself as a performance. It unfolds naturally, quietly, like something you are witnessing rather than something being presented. And then there are the quieter moments, the ones where Xavier is not using his abilities. He is simply present, speaking, remembering, trying to hold on to something that is slipping away. Those scenes carry a different kind of weight. There is no urgency, no spectacle, just time passing and a person trying to make sense of it. Because they remind you this is not just a powerful figure. It is a man nearing the end of his journey, and Stewart approaches that reality with care. He does not exaggerate it. He does not soften it. He allows it to exist as it is, uneven, unpredictable, painful, and in doing so, he gives Xavier something he has never fully had before: vulnerability, not as weakness but as truth. That is what elevates this performance. It is not about power, it is about loss. Not about control, but the absence of it. And when it's over, you do not just remember Xavier as a leader. You remember him as a man who struggled to hold on to himself until he no longer could. And that is what makes this performance unforgettable. She barely speaks, no long speeches, no explanations, no dramatic introduction, and yet you cannot look away. In Logan, Dafne Keane delivers something rare. A performance built on presence, because Laura does not rely on dialogue to communicate. She exists through observation, through reaction, through the way she moves through space. She does not need words. She communicates through silence, through movement, through the way she watches everything around her. There is intensity in that stillness. It is not passive, it is active. She is always absorbing something, processing, learning, and that is what makes her so compelling. You are not waiting for her to speak, you are watching for what she notices. From the moment she appears, you feel it. Something is different. She is not like the others, not like Logan, not like Xavier. She is unreadable, calm, still. Distant, there is no immediate emotional access to her, and that distance creates curiosity. You are trying to understand her, the same way she's trying to understand the world, and then, without warning, she shifts. Her first major moment of action is not just engaging, it is startling. Because of the contrast, this quiet child suddenly becomes something instinctive, fast, precise, relentless, and Keane commits to it fully. There is no hesitation. No softening. She does not present it as performance, she presents it as instinct, and that makes it believable, completely. There is no restraint in how she expresses that side of the character. She makes you believe that this child is capable of real impact, not exaggerated, not stylized, but immediate, unpredictable, and that unpredictability gives her presence an edge. But what truly defines the performance is not just that intensity. It is the balance, because Laura is not just a weapon. She is a child who was never given the chance to simply be one, and Keane expresses that without forcing it, without exaggeration. She allows it to emerge naturally, in fragments. In small moments, a look of curiosity, a moment of confusion, a reaction to something simple like conversation, like connection. You can see her learning, not in a structured way, but in a reactive one. She observes, imitates, tests. And those subtle shifts tell you everything about where she is internally. That is where the performance becomes layered, because Laura exists between two states, innocence and intensity, and Keane moves between them effortlessly. Without signaling the transition, one moment she is observing, quiet, absorbing, the next she is reacting, instinctively, with force, and it never feels artificial. It does not feel like a switch. It feels like two parts of the same identity existing together. That is what makes it so compelling, because you are not watching a performance. You are watching someone who feels real. Someone shaped by what has been done to her, but still searching for something more, something undefined but necessary. And then there are the emotional moments, the points where Laura begins to connect, to respond, to feel. Dafne Keane doesn't overplay those moments. She doesn't push them forward. She lets them settle, lets them breathe. And because of that, they land harder. You're not being told what to feel. You're discovering it alongside her. You don't just see Laura change, you feel it, gradually, quietly. And that progression feels earned because it isn't rushed, it isn't simplified. That's incredibly difficult for any performer, but for someone so young, it's remarkable. The level of control, the awareness of when to hold back, when to react, when to simply exist within a moment, it all builds into something that feels complete. And by the end of the film, she is no longer just a supporting presence. She is essential, not just to the story, but to what the story means. Because Laura isn't just part of Logan's journey, she is what gives it direction, the reason it continues, the reason it matters. And that only works because Keane makes you believe in her, completely, without excess, without effort, just through presence. This isn't just a strong debut, it's a performance that demands attention, and proves without needing to say it that she belongs. In a story this heavy, it would be easy to focus only on the central trio, Logan, Xavier, Laura, But in Logan, the world feels real because of the people around them. The ones who don't stay long, the ones who don't take the spotlight, but still leave an impact. They don't exist to take attention, they exist to give context, to remind you that beyond this journey life continues in fragments. At the center of that is Caliban, a character who could have easily faded into the background but doesn't. He doesn't fight like Logan, he doesn't lead like Xavier, he endures. And the film treats that endurance as something meaningful, not secondary. Caliban is fragile, dependent, living in the shadows both physically and emotionally, but there is a quiet resilience in him, one that never asks to be noticed. He doesn't try to be more than he is, he simply remains, and in a film filled with intensity, that kind of presence becomes grounding. He cares for Xavier, he supports Logan in ways that are rarely acknowledged. Small, consistent actions, holding things together behind the scenes, there is a quiet loyalty in him, not spoken, not emphasized, just there, and that is what makes it feel real. Because not every contribution needs to be dramatic to matter. No grand speeches, no defining moments meant to impress, just presence, consistency, and that makes him human. Because not everyone in this story is built for confrontation. Some are built to endure it, to adapt, to carry its aftermath without ever stepping forward. Then there are the others, the people they encounter along the way, strangers, families. Brief connections that don't last, and the film treats those moments with care. They aren't distractions from the main story, they are reflections of it, glimpses of a different kind of life, one that feels distant but still possible. These characters don't exist to push the story forward, they exist to provide contrast, to remind you what normal life looks like, what peace feels like, what has been lost, and that contrast matters. Because without it, the journey would feel isolated. These moments anchor the story in something familiar. There is warmth in those interactions, a softness the rest of the film rarely allows, conversations that are not driven by urgency, spaces that feel lived in, not transitional, and because it is so temporary, it carries more weight, because you know it cannot last. You feel that fragility in real time. That is what makes these supporting characters effective. They don't need long arcs, they don't need detailed backstories, they just need to feel real, and they do. Every interaction adds something. Even the smallest moments, a conversation, a gesture, a shared space, build the world around the central story. They give it texture, depth, a sense that what is happening exists within something larger, because without them, Logan's world would feel empty, but with them, you see what is at stake, not just survival, not just escape, but the idea of something better, something worth protecting, even if it only exists for a moment, even if it cannot be held onto. Caliban and the supporting characters don't dominate the film, but they ground it. They remind you that this isn't just a story about extraordinary individuals, it's a story about people, some confronting, some supporting, some simply caught in between. And all of them part of the world Logan is trying to move through, a world that may not remember them for long, but feels more real because they were there. Every story needs opposition, a force that pushes back, a presence that applies pressure. In Logan, that force is always there, watching, tracking, waiting. It doesn't need to dominate every moment to be felt. Its presence is constant, even when it isn't visible. The antagonists serve their role. They create tension, they move the story forward, they keep pressure on Logan, Xavier, and Laura, but they are not the heart of the film, they are not even its focus, and that is intentional. Characters like Pierce and Dr. Rice represent something larger, not as fully developed individuals, but as extensions of a system, control, authority, a mindset that reduces people to function. They are not meant to be deeply explored, they are meant to be felt as a constant threat, and in that sense they succeed. Their presence builds urgency, keeps the story in motion. They are always close, always ready to intervene. And that consistency creates pressure. But beyond that, there is limited depth. We do not explore their motivations in detail. We do not see complex layers. We understand what they do, but not fully who they are. And that creates a gap, not one that weakens the film, but one that becomes noticeable. Because while they are effective, they are not memorable in the long term. They don't linger in your thoughts afterward. You don't revisit their perspective. They don't stay with you, and that is unusual for a genre where antagonists often define scale. But Logan shifts that focus inward. The central conflict isn't between Logan and external forces. It is within Logan himself. His past, his guilt, his identity. The antagonists create the pressure, but they do not define the meaning, and that is the trade-off. By keeping them simple, the film creates more space for its characters, more room for emotion, more time for relationships to develop without interruption. It prioritizes internal struggle over external complexity, but in doing so, it limits the depth on the opposing side. So what remains is this: opposition that is effective but not deeply layered, a presence that builds tension but does not define the experience. They are part of the structure, not the soul, and perhaps that is the point. Because Logan was never truly about overcoming an opponent. It was about confronting something far more difficult, something that doesn't disappear when the conflict ends, the weight of a life shaped by struggle. The consequences that remain long after the action fades. And in that story, the greatest challenge was never standing across from him. It was already within him. There is something you notice while watching Logan. It doesn't feel artificial. Not in the way many superhero films do. There is no sense of constructed spectacle guiding your attention. It feels grounded, textured, real, and that comes down to craft. The way every element works together to support the tone, rather than overshadow it. The cinematography plays a major role in that. The way the film is shot tells its own story. Wide open landscapes, empty roads, dusty horizons, long stretches of space, they create distance, isolation, a sense that the world has expanded outward while emotionally closing in. It feels like there is space everywhere and nowhere to belong within it, and then the camera moves closer, tighter shots, faces, details, and that shift changes everything. The scale disappears, the world fades. And all that remains is the person in front of you, their expression, their hesitation, their pain, their expressions. And suddenly you're not looking at a world, you're looking at people, worn down, exhausted, human. The camera doesn't just observe them, it stays with them. It allows discomfort to settle. It allows emotion to exist without interruption. And that contrast between vast emptiness and intimate detail defines the visual language of the film. It constantly shifts your perspective. One moment, the characters feel lost in a world too large for them. The next, the world disappears entirely, and all that remains is what they are feeling. It reminds you how small they are in a world that has already moved forward, and how much weight they still carry despite that. Then there's the sound, or more importantly, the absence of it. This isn't a film that relies on constant music to guide emotion. It trusts silence, and that silence isn't empty, it is intentional. Moments where nothing plays, where all you hear is breathing, footsteps, wind moving through open space. The kind of detail that keeps you grounded in the environment. It creates presence. You're not being told what to feel, you're allowed to feel it on your own. And because of that restraint, when the action arrives, it lands harder. Not because it is louder, but because it interrupts that stillness. Every impact feels heavy. Every movement carries weight. There's no exaggerated sound design trying to amplify the moment. It is direct, immediate, unembellished. And that makes each moment feel less like spectacle and more like disruption, something that unsettles rather than excites. The effects follow that same approach. They don't draw attention to themselves, and that is exactly why they work. There is no moment where you pause to notice the technical work, no visual excess trying to impress. They exist to support what is happening, not to define it. Everything feels integrated, seamless, as if it belongs in the same physical space as the characters. And that consistency reinforces the grounded tone. There is no over-the-top presentation, no distractions, just careful, controlled execution so that nothing breaks the immersion. Because once that immersion breaks, the emotional connection weakens, and Logan never allows that to happen. The production design carries that same intention. The environments feel worn, used, nothing looks new, nothing looks polished. Everything has texture, layers, a sense of history that isn't explained but felt. From abandoned spaces to vehicles to clothing, you sense that this world has been lived in, that it has moved through time, changed gradually. Settled into something quieter, something less hopeful. There is no exaggeration to make it feel dystopian. It doesn't need it. The details do the work. Faded tones, dust, imperfections, they tell you everything. That time has passed. That things have changed, and not for the better. All of this works together, not to make the film larger, but to make it more believable. Because Logan isn't trying to overwhelm you. It is trying to draw you in, to make you feel present. Not watching a story, but experiencing it. And that immersion gives everything else its weight. That is why the action feels heavier, why the emotions land deeper. Because everything around them, the visuals, the sound, the world, supports the same idea. This isn't fantasy, it feels real. And once you accept that, everything carries more impact. Because in a world that feels this grounded, nothing feels certain. Most franchise films are built to continue, to expand, to leave paths open, to set up what comes next. But Logan does something rare. It chooses to end. And that choice isn't just narrative, it is creative. It begins with James Mangold, because this isn't just direction, it is restraint. Mangold doesn't approach this like a typical superhero film. There is no obligation to spectacle, no need to connect every moment to a larger universe, no pressure to leave room for continuation. Instead, he strips everything down, removes the excess, focuses on what matters. No elaborate costumes dominating the frame, no overwhelming mythology taking over the story, just character. And that decision changes everything. Because once expectations are removed, space is created. Space for emotion, for silence, for moments that don't need to lead anywhere else, moments that can exist on their own without needing to justify themselves. Mangold keeps the focus exactly where it belongs, on the people. He allows scenes to breathe. He lets conversations linger long enough to feel natural. He trusts the performances to carry the story without reinforcing them through spectacle. And that isn't easy in a genre built on momentum, but it is what gives Logan its identity. Because this isn't a story driven by events, it is driven by choices, small, personal, often difficult choices. And Mangold ensures those choices feel real. What makes it even more effective is how he balances everything: the intensity, the emotion, the quiet. None of it overwhelms the film. It never leans too far in one direction. The confrontations feel controlled, never excessive for their own sake. The sadness feels earned, never forced. And the quiet moments are just as important as everything else. Sometimes more. That balance prevents the film from becoming overwhelming, because a story this heavy could easily feel too much. But Mangold understands restraint. He knows when to hold back, when to let a moment end, when to allow silence to carry meaning. He also draws from influences beyond the traditional superhero structure: Western, noir, road drama, but instead of forcing them together, he allows them to blend naturally. They don't feel like references, they feel like part of the film itself. The result doesn't feel like a mixture. It feels like something original, something that exists outside the usual expectations. But the most important decision he makes is trusting the ending. He doesn't soften it. He doesn't extend it for comfort. He doesn't leave space for continuation. He lets it remain final. And in a franchise landscape built on continuation, that is bold, because endings carry risk. They close doors, they limit possibilities, but they also create meaning. They give weight to everything that came before. And Mangold understands that. He understands that without an ending, nothing fully resonates. So what remains is a film that feels complete, not because it answers everything, but because it knows where to stop. It doesn't try to be everything. It simply tries to be honest. And that honesty is what makes Logan stand apart, not just as a superhero film, but as a story allowed to end on its own terms. There is something surprising about Logan. You don't need prior knowledge, no deep familiarity, no understanding of timelines or history, and it still works, completely. Because the film doesn't rely on recognition, it relies on clarity. It gives you just enough to understand who these people are and why they matter. Logan is tired, Xavier is fading, Laura is being pursued. That is all you need. Everything else, the past, the legacy, the history, it exists, but it is not required. It is texture, not foundation, and that is what makes it accessible. It doesn't assume familiarity. It welcomes it but does not depend on it. The story stands on its own because its emotional core is universal. You don't need context to understand loss, or responsibility, or the weight of time. That is the difference. Story first. Everything else second. The film isn't trying to remind you of what came before. It isn't focused on revisiting history. It isn't reinforcing continuity. It is trying to tell you something now, something immediate, a complete story. With its own beginning, its own middle, its own end, and that clarity shapes the entire experience. So even if you've never seen another X-Men film, you're not lost. There's no barrier to entry, no sense that you're missing something essential. You're pulled in because the focus isn't on continuity, it's on character. The film doesn't overwhelm you with exposition. It doesn't pause to explain every detail, every connection, every piece of lore. Instead, it trusts you. It lets you experience it. You understand Logan through what he does, the way he keeps his distance, the way he reacts under pressure, the way he carries himself. You understand Xavier through what he's facing, his confusion, his moments of clarity, his struggle to hold on to himself. And you understand Laura through what's happening to her, the way she observes, the way she reacts, the way she learns. No prior knowledge needed, and that approach creates something rare. You're not processing information, you're absorbing experience. The film doesn't tell you who these characters are, it shows you. And that makes the connection immediate, instinctive, emotional rather than analytical, because the themes are universal. Aging, loss, responsibility, survival, these aren't tied to a franchise. They're human, they don't require context, they require empathy, and that's what makes the film accessible. It doesn't ask, do you know this universe? It asks, do you understand these people? And the answer is yes, almost instantly. If you have followed the X-Men story, the film resonates even deeper. There's history behind every look. Every line carries echoes of something that came before. Every interaction feels layered with meaning beyond the moment. But if you haven't, you still feel the weight, because the film builds it from the ground up. It doesn't rely on recognition. It creates its own emotional foundation. What you get is something rare, a film that exists within a larger universe but doesn't depend on it, a story that stands on its own while still rewarding those who know more. It respects both audiences without favoring one over the other, and that's why Logan stands out, because it proves something important. You don't need a vast universe to tell a powerful story. You don't need interconnected timelines or expansive world building to create impact. You just need characters and something meaningful at stake. And in Logan, that's exactly what you get. So what is Logan really? Is it the greatest superhero film ever made? For some, yes. For others, not entirely. Because here's the truth, Logan is powerful. Logan is different. Logan is deeply emotional. But it isn't flawless. And that's exactly why it works. This is a film that dares to slow down, to focus on people instead of spectacle, to exchange scale for intimacy. And that's not an easy decision in a genre built on momentum. It gives you characters who feel real, not idealized. Not exaggerated but grounded. Emotion that feels earned. Not inserted for effect but developed over time. Moments that don't just entertain, they stay with you. Quietly, persistently. It doesn't follow the formula, it reshapes it. Not by rejecting the genre, but by redefining it, by asking different questions, by shifting the focus from what happens to why it matters, and in doing so it becomes something rare, a superhero story that feels human. But at the same time, you can sense the imperfections. The pacing slows in places, the repetition becomes noticeable, some elements feel underdeveloped, left open without enough support to fully land. And the ending, as impactful as it is, feels like it takes slightly longer to arrive, not enough to disrupt the film, but enough to be felt. These aren't minor details, they are noticeable, and over time, they become clearer. Especially when you reflect on the experience. They remind you that the film, for all its strengths, isn't perfectly balanced, that there are moments where intention and execution don't fully align. So where does that leave it? Somewhere in between. Not flawless, not untouchable, but still something special, because what Logan does well, it does exceptionally well. It creates emotion without forcing it. It builds tension without relying on scale. It gives meaning to a character who could have easily become repetitive. And maybe perfection isn't the goal. Maybe it never was, because this story, like its main character, isn't meant to be flawless. It's meant to feel real, messy, heavy. Incomplete in places, but honest. And that honesty is what defines it, more than the action, more than the structure, more than the genre itself. When you step back, what stays with you isn't the imperfections. It's the feeling, the weight of the story. The impact of the characters, the sense that you've experienced something meaningful, not just within its narrative, but in how it chose to tell it. And that's not something every film achieves. So no, Logan isn't perfect. But it doesn't need to be, because what it accomplishes is something far more important. It leaves an impression, and sometimes that's more than enough.